Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is...
Spencer, not from Knitting the Stash.
Yes, from Knitting the Stash. You've been incorporated.
Oh.
It's true.
I'm part of the knitting project.
Yeah, I think so. You've been on the podcast enough now that you're part of
yeah.
You're part
Thanks
of
for having me on the podcast.
Hive mind.
Oh.
Yeah. So this is episode 117. It's 1 million episodes. I feel like at some point we've got to stop doing the numbers.
Stop numbering the episodes?
The numbers get a little weird because...
I think it's cool. It keeps track of how many you've done.
I know, but once you get to like 834, it's just...
It shows that you're doing a lot.
Am I going to get to 834? I don't know about that. Anyway.
How many years is it taking to get to 117?
When did I start? Was 2017? In October of 2017, so 2018, 19, 20.
You rock about 25 episodes a year.
Yeah, so this is year 4 or 5, something like that. I'm very bad at that math that crosses over. Anyway.
Whoa. That was just multiplication. Yes. Alright, so what's your episode about?
Well, this one is about the pattern queue, the project queue, right? We already started talking about this a little bit because I mentioned to you that there's always these projects that you're like, I want to do that, and then maybe you buy the yarn for it, or then you don't, and then but something else comes up, and you're just like, squirrel, and I'm working on something else.
So you've got a list of things.
But they don't always go in that order, and sometimes... anyway, so we got to talk about that, and I was curious if your project's
I've got a project queue, yeah.
I bet you do.
Yeah.
So we have that, and then I have new kits that are in the shop, and if you are a newsletter subscriber, this is the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. Spencer's always telling me I need to remember to say what it is. So over on knittingthestash.com, which is the website where you can find everything about the podcast and the shop and patterns and classes and all that stuff, knittingthestash.com, there's a Flock Farm Yarn Shop, and that's the place where I've been kind of curating this set of yarns from small batch indie producers, and I put together a new kit for one of the yarns there. So I've got that to talk about.
So what's a kit?
A kit is going to be sometimes it's a project bag and a skein and a pattern, and I also have just skeins and patterns. So it's kind of like a way to
buy this thing. And it's all you need.
It's all you need to make the thing.
All you need, except for the knowledge.
The knowledge, and usually the needles and notions and little things like that.
And the ability to put it in a productive queue to get to it.
Right. Yeah.
So you don't sell that.
I don't sell that. We can talk about that. We can learn together. So I have a kit. I have a couple kits. And if you are a newsletter subscriber, you can do that by going to knittingthestash.com and then clicking that little contact subscribe button, whatever it is. Down there, there's a thing where you put your email in. And then you'll get on the newsletter list, and then you'll get all the updates, and you'll get coupon codes and all the fun stuff. So if you were on the newsletter list, you heard about the kits already, but I want to make sure that I announce them on the podcast so that everybody has a chance to get over there and support Joanne Mackey's work, because she's the shepherdess who created the wool and the yarn, and Karen Adamazic, who made some of the project bags for the special kits. So anyway, we'll talk about that in a second.
Melissa's also really into kits. I don't know if you know this about her. This house was actually a kit that we built, and she liked the fact that it was a kit.
Yeah.
Like
I think
the idea of getting the whole thing.
I thought about writing a whole book on kits at one point. Do you remember that?
She's deep into kits.
It's all like it's all set
Cooking
out.
Kits, building kits.
It would be really fun to write that.
And now you're selling kits.
Now I'm selling my own kits. Weird. It comes full circle. Yeah.
Ask her about kits sometime. She's got a lot to say.
I'm gonna get a flood of messages like, "So kits, talk to me about it."
The house is working out so far as a kit.
Yeah, and if you know anything about historically, like about kits, like
she's
knitting
trying to get you to
kits,
do research for her and stuff.
That would be awesome. Send me messages. knittingthestash@gmail.com. I'm also working on a sweater. So I'm working on the Orbits pattern by Rachel Illsley.
You're working on a sweater.
That
is really different.
And it's all over colorwork, and I've already divided for the sleeves and I've almost
finished
finished the body. Yeah, I'm going to show it.
Okay, cool. It's cool. It's cool. I like it. I approve the sweater.
You do?
It's hefty.
We'll talk about the yarn choice on that one. It's a little...
sweater!
It's a little... The gauge, the fabric is a little bit...
It's good.
Well,
it's got some oomph to it. You don't want a sweater that's just going to...
I think it's going to relax once it gets washed. I promise.
Alright. It's a cool sweater.
That's what you say.
I dig it.
Okay, so kits. Let's do kits real quick. So if you're interested in knitting up a new fun pattern for the winter, I've got the... I just invented this. This is the Fire and Ice Cowl. And I think, we'll see if it comes up. This is the fire. And then if you turn it the other way, like this, you get the ice. So these were interesting patterns that I modified up and kind of changed quite a bit and charted from knittingthestash.com. She has an awesome website where she's this mathematically inclined person.
She created this like big archive of patterns, right?
She loves to create stitches and stitch like her own stitch dictionary kind of thing up online. And
can I put it on?
You can put it on. And it was really fun to find a couple of her patterns and then modify them so that they could be in the cowl. And I charted them. They weren't charted and they were only on right side, and so I had to do, or they were only right side and wrong side. I had to make them in the round, and it was very complicated.
There were some headaches involved.
But I think it came out really nice, and it's just because your beard is a little scratchy. So this...
It's got a good length to it.
Yeah, it's a nice size, I think. And it's 4 panels, so you get 2 panels of the lace fire and 2 panels of the ice. So if you're new to lace and cables, it's kind of like a great introductory pattern because the lace is really simple. It's only yarn overs and a single kind of decrease, knit 2 together. And if you're new to cables, it's only a 3x3 cable cross once every few rows. So it's really simple introduction to both of those techniques.
So you got cables in one panel.
And lace in the other.
But when you're going around, you're doing cable,
lace.
Right.
And it keeps you interested as you're knitting. It's a nice size, I think.
Interested.
Yeah.
Keeps you interested.
If you're just...
Or completely on edge because it's hard.
No, it's not hard though. I don't think...
It's not a hard one?
Yeah, and the test knitters all thought it was like nice and kind of like a rhythmic...
Oh yeah, I look at that
pattern.
and that looks pretty complicated.
You're maybe not an advanced beginner. So yeah, so this is the new pattern. It's up on Ravelry and it's up on my website, so you can
What do
get
they
it
get in the kit?
In the kit, you get the PDF for the pattern, which is also, it has charts, but it also has written instructions. So if you really are new to these things and you're not comfortable with charts, you can use the written instructions to learn how to read the charts or use the charts to read.
Nice.
Anyway, and in the kits, this particular one that I made the sample was knit up with the Georgia rustic wool, which is from Joanne Mackey, and she's down in Georgia, and she's raising Gulf Coast native sheep. And this is a critical breed. We got some Save 'em to Shave 'em stickers that can go in with the kits, which is really fun. That's the Livestock Conservancy's program to try to raise awareness about critical sheep breeds. So this is 100% Gulf Coast native. I knitted up in the 2-ply. I also have a 3-ply. Both would be perfect. The 2-ply is going to show off the lace really well, and the 3-ply would be really perfect for the cables. But both work well for this particular combo of lace.
This guy is the 2-ply?
That's the 2-ply, yeah. And so it 2-ply is really good for lace because it kind of rolls open and shows the yarn overs. Yeah. But it does really well with the cables too.
The cable section is this
pretty
one.
Impressed, yeah, with the kind of plumpness of the cables and the way that they show up. The stitch definition is pretty good.
The plumpness of the cables.
Yes. Cables are plump.
I was impressed with the plumpness of the cables.
So you can get a kit with a single skein of yarn and a little cotton project bag. Or you can go for the deluxe kit, which has one of the awesome S Diva Designs bags.
Wow.
Along with a set of stitch markers and your yarn and your PDF download. So it's kind of like a treat yourself kind of a thing. You know, you could get a little project bag, get a little cowl, you know, feel happiness. That's what I always feel when I get a kit. Happiness. So yeah, that's the new kit, that's the new pattern, and they're up on the website, and you can also just get the pattern over on Ravelry as well if you want to if that's your platform of choice.
Saw it up there.
Yeah, I'm kind of excited to see it out in the world and see if people...
Yeah, the pictures, you had like a black jacket on, cowl going on.
I do, yeah.
They look good.
And the test knitters knit the cowl up in some really interesting yarns. They're really just beautiful. So, Courtney, Cheryl, and Megan, thank you very much for doing the test knit. And Joanne, thank you for the yarn support for the cowl design. And yeah, and thank you to knittingthestash.com for the awesome patterns that I was able to modify.
It's great.
Yeah, it was fun. So that's the kit. And since we've now talked about kits and projects, maybe it's time to talk about
the queue.
The queue!
The project queue.
Okay, so here's what I'm thinking. I was realizing as yarn, some days, let me put it this way, as yarn comes into the mailbox, ends up on the dining room table.
Some days, every day when yarn comes into the mailbox.
Okay, you want to rephrase,
okay.
That's fine.
Okay.
So
twice a day when deliveries of yarn show up.
We're not going to talk about the amount of deliveries that show up at the house because last I checked,
I get some stuff. All right, I order some stuff.
A reviewer of one kind or another.
I order some stuff. Okay.
Brings all the brown trucks to the yard. Kind of.
All right. Now, as the yarn shows up.
Okay. Occasionally. And begins to pile up on, say, the kitchen table. Like, you know, I've got one project already in a project bag sitting there, and then there's, like, the yarn for the next shawl, and then, the sock yarn for Zach's socks show up, and then, you know, on and on and on. It's kind of like, I start looking at it, and I'm like, I leave it out as long as I can, because I think to myself, if I just see it there...
Yeah, who needs to eat at the kitchen table? We can just have yarn out there for days and days.
I wouldn't recommend eating yarn, but in a way...
It feeds the soul.
It feeds the soul. Exactly. Okay. Oh my god, I love you. Okay, so when I start seeing the yarn piling up after many mailings, you know, like it's not just, you know.
You have like 5 or 6 projects in the queue, you think?
I see it and I'm just like, oh, if I put it away, then it's just going to become one of those projects that's like, I was going to do that. And by the time the yarn showed up, I was already in the middle of the other project that I could pick up while I was waiting for the yarn, and then that one took too long, and then, I found something new, so now I'm actually on to the next thing. So it's
also, like... you will sometimes cannibalize the yarn from one project for another project.
Yeah.
If you need to. So, like, you have your sweater quantity over here.
Right.
It's been sitting there for a few months, and you start pilfering it to do some different color work on something else.
Yeah. Which is what happened with this last sweater.
That's what I was thinking. You pulled out of the...
out of the stash. Like
she in the middle of the night, well, not in the middle of the night, at 11 o'clock at night, she's like, oh, there's that Estonian yarn. And she goes and digs out the Estonian yarn, which was for something else.
Which
and it worked perfectly for this new sweater.
Mittens for you. Sorry about that.
Can I get one, maybe?
Maybe one mitten. Actually, I ran out and I had to order more from Estonia.
Yeah.
Because I put this order in a long time ago before all the postal stuff changed and like it was expensive to get the book and the yarn, and then... Anyway, I used the 2 skeins on this sweater, and now I need one more to do the color work on the sleeves. So I went back to the website, and they had 1 skein left. So I'm like, so I was like, I'll take that. So anyway, but it does happen that things get cannibalized from other projects because you're like, then you're in the middle of project A, and...
So what's your philosophy about the queue? Do you have to follow the queue? Like
I've never followed the queue.
A, B, C, D, E. You've never followed the queue.
That's the problem, is that like I'll have things in my mind that I really want to do, and if I really want to get to them, I'll get to them. I think that's part of the thing.
Yeah.
It's like if there's something you really want to do in your life or in your knitting, you make time for it. Eventually,
it'll draw you in.
Yeah.
It's so appealing.
Maybe not right now, but like maybe a month from now you make time for it.
So you're okay with leapfrogging the queue.
You know,
you were going to do this next, but really that thing 3 things down that just showed up today, you just do it.
And sometimes that's like the way to do it because it's what you're interested in at that moment. You know, it's like that's the thing that's going to actually be what you want to do. But at the same time, I guess I have a little queue guilt about the whole thing. Like, you
don't have queue phobia.
No.
But you have queue guilt.
But that's it. Like, I look at my...
Like, you feel like you should have done the first thing in the queue.
I look in my stash and I'm like, oh, there was that. Oh, there was that. Oh, there was that. You know, and it's like, I feel like the stash kind of accumulates in part because of the queue
I haven't noticed that at all with your stash. Like, accumulating, growing.
Don't actually move that way because then the camera would show the amount of yarn. I think it actually multiplies by itself in the bins. I think it reproduces, kind of like bunnies.
All right, so you will jump the queue.
But I don't necessarily... it's good and bad to do
remorseful.
it. Because then when I go back, I'm like, oh, the stash is growing. But I also think that the stash is kind of like... So I've tried to reframe it. So that the stash becomes a kind of like... it's like a museum of possibilities. It's like the things that you wanted for yourself, the things you promised that you would do for yourself, or like that you would really appreciate or that you think are important. It's kind of like, it's the storage unit for all of those feelings. It's kind of like...
Damn. Go on. This sounds pretty good.
Because I feel like in my... like, even if I haven't finished the projects in my stash, I think to myself, like, I think fondly of them. Like, oh, I wanted to do that, and it's still there for me to do, which means that there's still a possibility that it will happen. You know, it kind of like holds space.
Yeah. And you have gone back and finished some stuff that you didn't get to for a long time.
Yeah, I'm not going to say I don't have any whips. I have one whip right now, and it's an old pair of socks that I didn't finish.
That purple pair.
I didn't finish the second sock yet because I messed up the decreases when I picked it up, and then I haven't gone back to rip it out. But that's the only whip I have, so it's not like I'm whippy.
No.
You know.
Well,
what about you?
Okay. I would say that. Well, I just had something else I wanted to say.
Okay, go ahead.
All right.
Good.
I was remembering when you and I were writing books at the same time. It was like back in the day.
I wouldn't recommend that. It's like a couples therapy kind of a thing. Don't write books at the same time.
Okay, but there's this thing with writing. I don't know, people who are writers out there, where it can be very hard to leapfrog to the next writing project unless you finish the one that you're working on.
Oh yeah.
Just because you've kind of got to eat that thing and get it through your system and out the other end.
That was really interesting.
Before you can move on to the next project. Writing's weird that way.
I feel the same way about knitting.
You feel that way? I feel like you said you just leapfrogged.
No. But I finish what I'm working on before I leapfrog the next thing in the queue.
So what you're doing, you feel like you got to finish it.
Yeah.
Oh
yeah. That's why I'm a monogamous knitter. We've talked about this.
We haven't talked about that.
Like I have a sweater, and I'm not going to go on to finish anything else. Like, I'm not going to take on another sweater until that sweater's done.
Right.
I will take on an accessory for here and there. Like, I need to knit another version of your hat for the next pattern that's coming out. So I'll pop that out and, like, I can knit that on the side. Right. It becomes the pattern that comes with me in the car or whatever, Yeah. But I wouldn't pick up another sweater.
Yeah.
It's like...
Well, I think the way I do projects is, if I think about it, I definitely have the queue. Like, there's the stuff that I hope to do next summer or in the future. I don't have the stuff for it yet. Right. I can't do it until the summer because it involves, like, something outside or whatever. So I have this list of things, and it relies on, like, ordering stuff, buying stuff, growing something, learning something, whatever. But I feel like there's a good percentage of things in the queue that never get done.
Never. And you just have those materials for a long time. Like,
well, mine aren't always material based because I don't just have a big stash of like.
But we did just move some of our stuff because we were. Like,
there's some
doing
iron.
New York
I've got a bunch of steel.
And he pulled like a railroad tie out of the garage, and he was just like, "Hey, I've got this thing," and I'm like,
"It was a railroad rail."
Where did that come from? And like, how long have you had it for? And cool. What is happening?
It's illegal to traffic in railroad rails.
Really?
Yeah.
So we shouldn't even be talking about it.
Well, when I bought it, I felt kind of sketchy about it, but
wow.
I think because they don't want people tearing them up off the railroads.
We don't know what you're talking about with the railroad. I don't know what you mean. It was just a big piece of iron.
But I feel like the way I get to my projects is by deciding not to do certain ones.
Yeah.
Like that's the only way I move forward. But I sometimes do get like the workshop I'm building right now. Mm-hmm. Like I say I'm building it right now, but I spent a day on the bulldozer, a few days making plans, and now it's just sitting there for...
It's a lot of mud.
Many months. Mm. Like, it's just going to kind of sit there for a while.
Yeah. But that's a timing thing and a materials thing.
It's a lot of things, but it's also just kind of sitting there. I think it'll get done.
I hope it does.
I think it's going to get done.
But that's the thing, like, so...
But it's stalled out, man.
With house projects, we're often like that. Like, when we moved into our old house on Washington, the house was kind of in... bad shape.
Down.
Like, actually, the toilet was being held up by some fence boards that someone had shoved under the floor. This was, like, first house, like,
sketchy.
The place you buy that you're like, we can afford it, and then you flip it, and you do your best to, like, do some work into it, and then you live in it for 10 years. But instead of working on the house right away, we just built a deck. We were like, we can't deal with this. We're going to go outside.
Projects you just can't do.
Yeah, you turn away from the thing that's just like, I don't know how or when or wow. You're just like, I'm going to do this thing because this will give me something else. So
I think the project queue can be kind of like a downer. Like it can be kind of paralyzing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, there's like so many things I want to get to or whatever.
Yeah.
But I find, at least myself, if I do the thing that I really want to do the most on that list, it's usually the best.
Yeah.
It's just like, I just feel like building this thing today instead of the more pragmatic thing that I said I was going to do.
So maybe the queue gives a linearity to the whole thing, which maybe is a different way. Like a different way of looking at it would not be like, this to this to this to this. It could be just like, here's my pool of things that I'm interested in. Yeah. And like from that pool, I'm going to find the thing that I'm actually interested in right now. And that maybe takes a little bit of the pressure off.
Yeah, it's not a to-do list.
Right.
And it's just kind of like, oh, I haven't done all this stuff.
It's just like, look at all this stuff I could do. I feel like doing this thing.
Yeah.
And then it's just, it's the thing you want to do right now, and the pool of possibilities is just still there, and the pool can be added to, or it can be drained, or it can be whatever. It can be.
Now, what about scheduling your fishing in the pool? Saying like October's going to be this and November's going to be that.
I have to do a little more of that now with the shop and with some of the patterns, and like I'm responsible to other people, and I have different things going on, like, so I do have to schedule a little bit more. But
you don't like the idea.
But I'm not a big scheduler. Just like I remember.
Is that because you don't know how long it takes?
No, I know how long it takes, but I just don't. I'm still in the mode of being a knitter and just really enjoying the knitting part of it, and also then being the business person who's like, oh, I need to do X, Y, and Z in this order, even if it's not the order that I feel it in.
For you need to knit a thing that's a new pattern
for the sample, to this, for that, or whatever it is. Yeah. But it's kind of, your question reminds me of like back when our friend Steve was talking to me one day, because I was always knitting around. Steve and Amy were always hanging out when we were in the same town, and like. He just looked at me one day and he was like, so how long does it actually take you to knit it? Like, have you timed it? Like, how long it takes you to knit a sweater or a hat or a row or whatever? And I like recoiled from that, because I was like, if I actually thought about how much time it took, like how many minutes, how many hours it takes to like knit a sweater. It's just not how I want to think about it, It's like, oh God, like.
So you don't want to schedule a hat in a week.
No, but I have to
finish early,
sometimes.
you get the rest of the week off.
But sometimes I have to. I know I have to get this other sample done.
Yeah.
So I know I'm going to have to put this sweater on hold long enough to get that sample done before February 1st.
Well, plus you got that skein coming from Estonia, and that could take a while.
And that's one of the beauties of the whole queue thing, right? Like, if you are waiting for materials, that can be a moment when you kind of like move to something new. The trouble is that if you move to something new, you have to make sure to like go back and finish
with the same gauge
thing.
And
and knitting.
Don't you have to pull your needles off that thing and use it for something else? And...
Hopefully not. Yeah. Anyway,
I think leapfrogging is a good thing.
I'm surprised that neither of us are kind of bothered by it. We just do what we do, even if
I'm still bothered by the fact that I don't finish all the projects I imagine that I will do.
Okay.
Like, it gets to me. But
I'm kind of surprised to hear you say that a little bit,
but
because
I'm still productive.
The other thing I know about us is that we are 90%ers. Have we ever talked about that?
Yeah.
Total 90%ers. Like, we will get
with home projects.
We will get the thing done, except for those small details that never happen till like 5 years later, or never happen at all. So like, we just built the fence, but we didn't like, top the posts and put the, whatever the little caps on them. And, we do that a lot, the gates are good, but they don't have latches. It's like.
We just chained them up.
We're 90%ers, man. And so that's why.
With your knitting projects, you don't do that, do you?
No.
You finish them.
I finish them, yeah. But with house projects, we are absolutely 90%ers. Yeah. So it's kind of surprising for me to hear you say you like to finish stuff. Because I always associate you so much with the house projects.
Oh, right. I guess what I was saying is like the projects I never do. The projects I never even start. Like revamping the silo.
Right.
We've got this cool grain silo. And I have this awesome project planned. But I haven't had it planned for, I think, 10 years now.
Yeah. And the silo continues to kind of like...
It's just going to collapse. Yeah.
Yeah. It may be something that we actually need to deal with.
Maybe.
At some point. Yeah. So, thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Good luck with your projects. Mm-hmm. And you going to talk about the sweater next?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about the sweater.
Awesome sweater. Rugged.
He really likes this sweater.
It's
I like
cool
it too.
I like it.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right.
Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
See ya. So I hope you enjoyed having Spencer come on the cast. I love having him come on and have these conversations. It's like, you can probably guess that we talk and walk a lot, and we find ourselves down a lot of different rabbit holes. So I'd love to hear in the comments like what you all think about this question of the project queue or the project pool, or how you organize your knitting life and schedule things or not. And so let us know in the comments. We will love to keep the conversation going. So as promised, my whip this week is the Orbit sweater by Rachel Illsley, and you've probably seen this gorgeous sweater all over Ravelry. It was launched not that long ago, and Rachel's done some other pretty iconic patterns that I think you would also recognize. So when you go and check out this pattern, check out her other work, because she has some really gorgeous, she's really into this kind of all over color work, but not so much the yoke style of color work where, you just have the color work right up around the shoulders, but this style of color work that seems to, maybe it sometimes starts around the neck, but it really starts the majority of it is kind of in the body and the sleeves. So you see a lot of it in this kind of middle section of the sweaters. So yeah, when you check out this sweater, check out the other ones because I think they're all pretty amazing designs. This is, like I said, the Orbit sweater, and I think you can see why it gets that name just a little bit, because you've got these kind of this, I don't know, it reminds me of planetary orbits a little bit, the ways that the colorwork kind of goes in and out and has little satellites around it, and yeah, it's really showing up on the camera pretty well. I'm happy about that. So this is a top-down sweater, and you start up here with the collar and you work your way down, working increases as you go, and you can see that she does my favorite technique. There's lots of short rows back here at the top, and I think you'll be able to see that it's not quite on the mannequin right there. There you go. The short rows really add a good 1.5 inches to the back to raise up the neck, which is pretty important for most sweaters, but especially sweaters like this. My mannequin is like sideways today. I'm trying to get her to go the right way. Anyway, so the front doesn't have, I actually skipped a few rows in the front because I wanted to make sure that my armhole depth was going to be all right, and she talks about that in the pattern, how you can adjust your armhole depth in case you're not familiar with that. The issue is that your colorwork starts and then it's a little bit more difficult to adjust things because you are going to be in the middle of working a lot of colorwork while you're getting to and dividing for your sleeves. So making the call of whether or not you're going to use the extra rows up here is something that you want to be fairly sure about. Like, you want to check your row gauge and your math against her math to make sure that, you know, you're going to actually be working the correct number of rows for the inches that you need to achieve for where you need your armpits to be. So I had a different row gauge than is listed in Rachel's pattern, so I wanted to be a little bit careful about that, and that's part of the reason that I gave up some of these extra rows at the top here. My stitch gauge was exactly right on, and I'm not sure exactly how that happened because I'm using a totally different yarn, not a superwash yarn, and I'm holding it double. So somehow the gauge just worked out right, and I'm pretty happy about that. I'm using this Bio Shetland from BC Garn, and I believe that some of the BC Garn yarns are going out of creation, out of circulation, like out of they're not making them anymore. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments, but I had a little bit of trouble trying to find this particular Shetland yarn. I encountered it for the first time, I believe in Germany or Denmark, and picked up a couple skeins, and then I was able to find it from a stockist in the US for this particular sweater. It's a really lovely 100% wool, organic wool, and it is pretty much I would say it's like a lace weight, a very light fingering or a lace weight yarn. And that's why I held it double, because her pattern calls for fingering weight yarn, I believe, a kind of heavy fingering weight yarn, and she uses a superwash yarn, which makes a certain amount of sense given the pattern and the amount of color work that's going on and the drape that she was going for with this, and the sheen that she was going for with this particular pattern. So I went a little bit against the grain by choosing 100% wool and not superwash, but I think the actual effect is coming out pretty well. Now, I was talking about the availability of this yarn in part because I was trying to find good colors, you know, contrast colors that were going to actually work with each other. I loved this gray, and I really wanted to do a little bit more of a subtle main color contrast color than you see here, and I had planned originally to do dark color as my contrast color and to make it really subtle, because I wasn't a super big fan of the way that the upper part of this sweater worked if you're using a darker background color, main color, and then a lighter contrast color. You end up with a little bit of this, I feel like it looks a little bit like a clown kind of collar, if that makes sense. And you don't have that as much if you're using a light background main color and a dark contrast color. It kind of depends on where all of this is lining up. So yeah, originally I was going to go with a much darker contrast color, but when I put them together, it actually just didn't work. And one of the ways you can test that, if you've ever encountered that problem, is you can take your two skeins of yarn and photograph them side by side, and then turn your photo into black and white. And if you can't tell the difference between the colors, then they're not going to make for a good contrast if you're going for contrast and you're not going for them to, you know, completely blend together. So Anyway, that's how I ended up with the lighter contrast color instead of the darker. But part of the issue was that I couldn't find good light contrast colors in this particular yarn. So I had already knit up my swatch. I had already actually started the color work on the sweater with my darker contrast color before I decided that it wasn't working. And as you heard in the beginning of this episode, I kind of ran upstairs and started going through my stash to look for something that would be equivalent to this Bio Shetland that I could use as a contrast color. Now, luckily for me, because I collect so much yarn, as do many of you probably, I had some yarn in my stash that would work, and I'm using, this is my S Diva Designs project bag from Karen, and I love this one. This is sweater sized, and it's like perfect for the sweater. You can fit all your yarn and all your sweater actually in here, which is great. So the yarn I ended up using was an Estonian yarn, and it is the Heya, I'm probably not going to pronounce it correctly, Kindalong 82. The camera's kind of blowing it out a little bit here, but I'll put it down in the show notes. And I picked up this yarn from a shop in Estonia online when I was picking up the Estonian book about the history of traditional Estonian knitting. It didn't make sense for me, like shipping-wise, to ship the book and not get some yarn, so I grabbed some yarn. And I'm glad I did, because it ended up being perfect for this particular project. I finished the body, all the color work in the body, with this much yarn left from 2 of those skeins. So I knew when I got to about this point that I wasn't going to have enough for the color work that extends down the sleeves. So I quickly ran on their website, hoping that shipping wasn't going to be terrible, and it actually was really reasonable. So I got their last skein of this particular light gray color, and I will be able to now finish the sleeves once that shows up. And the good news is I have a long way to go on the body before I even go back to the sleeves. So I'll be able to keep knitting on this project for quite some time, and while I'm waiting for that yarn to show up, since we were talking about project pools and project queues and whatnot. I do love the Bio Shetland, and as Spencer was saying, it definitely produced a kind of more toothy, thicker fabric than what you might see in the original from Rachel's sample. Couple reasons for that. I mean, this is 100% wool. I'm also holding both yarns double, so it's definitely building up a good amount of fabric as I go. And you can see this is the wrong side of the work, and it's full of floats, obviously, because it's so much color work all over. So it's going to be a very warm sweater. It's going to be a kind of heftier sweater than it would have been had I chosen a superwash yarn of some kind. And that's good for me, because I run cold, and I'm pretty happy to have a very warm sweater that's not almost done, but it's getting pretty close to done. Yeah, and I think a couple of things about this that I wanted to show you while it was in process. I don't often show you all whips, but I think this one's worth seeing in process because of the way the colorwork works underneath the arms. So I've knit all over colorwork patterns before, and I find the ones that are the most kind of elegant often have the ability to continue or maintain the pattern underneath the armpits where you're dividing for the sleeves. So in this case, I actually picked up stitches in pattern under the arm and continued in pattern, so you can see that the pattern is not interrupted anywhere around the body, even though you have the arms coming down. Now that's a pretty awesome thing, I think, and in a lot of, in like a bottom-up sweater where you were doing all over color work, you would have to interrupt the pattern to a certain extent if you were going to put in set-in sleeves or armholes. Or what you could do is knit your tube and then steek it, which is another option for this all over color work. But a nice kind of function of this top-down thing is that you can continue in pattern right underneath where you've split for the sleeves, and then the sleeves themselves obviously will continue in pattern once I pick up those stitches and work down. So it's a really cool. Rachel's patterns are very they're elegant. They offer a lot of instruction for modification or for making sure that your sweater is going to fit you based on her schematics and based on her multi-size, it's a very size-inclusive pattern. And there's a lot of different ways that she's set up the charts so that they're easy to follow and you don't have to worry about color jogs and things like that. So even around the back of the sweater here where this is the beginning around marker would be here, you can see that there's not an interruption in the pattern. There's not a jog in the pattern where the one row helix is up to the next row, right? It's a pretty snazzy design in that respect. I'm very impressed with the way she writes patterns, and I've heard that from other knitters, but it's one thing to hear it and it's another to actually just experience it yourself. So this is the Orbit sweater from Rachel Illsley. It is in progress in that bio Shetland that I told you about, and hopefully by the next episode I'll have it finished and be able to show you and the rest of it and talk to you about all the finishing work that went into it. But if you're interested in the pattern, I would say definitely not a beginner pattern. Intermediate perhaps if you're comfortable with color work, because it does include short rows and it has lots and lots of charts. If you're comfortable with those things, I think you could probably pull it off, and it's a beautiful sweater, so I think you'd end up with the kind of sweater that you'd be really proud of and really love to wear. So I'd encourage it, and like I said, Rachel's great at writing patterns, so she's a good teacher in that respect. So I think that's about it for today, and if you're interested in checking out the kits that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the pattern itself, the Fire and Ice Cowl, is over on Ravelry and on my website, knittingthestash.com, and you can pick up kits for that cowl over in the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, which is also at knittingthestash.com/home or flockfarmyarnshop.com. Either way will get you there, and I'll put links down below. But you can pick up a kit for yourself. And that yarn from Joanne Mackey's flock of Gulf Coast native sheep is just beautiful, subtle, soft, good for close to skin garments and accessories. I really enjoyed working with it, and I hope you will enjoy knitting this new pattern. So thanks for hanging out today. I hope everybody is well, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. Take good care. Bye-bye.